Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're setting the stage for a chronological deep dive into a seriously fascinating 6-year legal saga. We are going to take a really close look at a case out of the Maricopa County Superior Court, Asuquo versus La Fuente Condominium Association. By tracing the exact court documents from this single dispute, we're going to completely demystify how the civil court system actually operates on a day-to-day basis. We'll see firsthand what happens when a self-represented individual tries to navigate the incredibly rigid, highly structured world of legal procedures, settlement negotiations, and the ultimate pursuit of finality. Honestly, it's a fantastic, real-world look at the sheer endurance required in civil litigation. So here is our roadmap for the life cycle of this lawsuit today. First, 1. Early procedural missteps. 2. Strict court protocols. 3. The disputed settlement. 4. Settlement terms and dismissal. And finally, 5. The post-judgment fallout. Let's get right into it. Section 1. Early procedural missteps.
We're kicking our timeline off in August 2020. This is when the plaintiff, who is representing himself, attempts to win the case right out of the gate by filing an application for a default judgment against the condominium association. But as the court documents reveal, this attempt is immediately rejected. I really want to highlight this timeline right off the bat just to show you the sheer endurance required in civil litigation. I mean, look at this span. We start with denied motions in August 2020, we move through strict protocols, hit a super dramatic settlement dispute in 2021, and we don't actually see the final epilogue of this exact dispute until March 2026. That is over half a decade of legal back and forth for a single civil case.
Now, the plaintiff's early procedural errors essentially forced the judge to step in. After that initial default application was denied, the defendant filed a motion to strike. But instead of responding normally, the plaintiff filed a motion to dismiss defendant's motion to strike. The judge actually had to explicitly spell out that this is never the correct way to do things. You just don't file a motion to dismiss a motion. The correct sequence in civil court is pretty simple. One side files a motion, the other side files a response, and then the original side can file a reply. And that's it. Briefing is complete. The judge also had to address the fact that the parties were actively arguing over how documents were even being delivered to each other. We can see the court's stance crystal clear in this quote. The court cannot micromanage how the parties serve documents. The judge bluntly noted he had about 500 cases on his docket. The message was, look, courts expect parties to resolve basic logistical issues themselves. He even offered some practical ultimatums, basically telling them to either agree to use an online tracker like Dropbox, or they'd be forced to come to court in person every single week just to hand each other paperwork on the record. Section 2. Strict court protocols. So by December 2020, the court decided it really needed to lay down the law. Because of all this ongoing procedural friction, Judge J. Smith issued a highly detailed minute entry featuring incredibly specific, rigid formatting protocols just to keep the litigation on track. You can see from the documentation the judge had to step in simply to ensure the case remained organized and somewhat manageable for everyone involved. And this is absolutely fascinating because it brilliantly illustrates just how highly structured civil procedure has to be. Think about these hyper-specific formatting rules for a second. The judge ordered the use of exactly 13-point font, not 12, not 14. He mandated a maximum of 3 footnotes per page, and no footnote could exceed 5 lines. If any attachments were over 50 pages, they had to be sequentially numbered so the court could actually find what was being referenced without, digging through a massive pile of paper. He even required the parties to exchange short 2-page letters 30 days before filing for summary judgment just to narrow down the issues beforehand. It's literally a masterclass in judicial calendar management. Section 3. The disputed settlement. Okay, this brings us to the dramatic climax of our case study. In August 2021, the parties had attended a settlement conference with a judge pro tempore back in June, and they actually signed a settlement agreement. But shortly after, the plaintiff attempted to completely back out of it. To understand the court's ruling on this, we have to look at the foundational elements of a contract according to the revised Arizona jury instructions. For a legally binding contract to exist, there must be an offer, an acceptance of that offer, consideration, and terms that are sufficiently specific so obligations can be clearly determined. The judge used these exact elements as a checklist to evaluate whether a true, binding agreement existed between the plaintiff and the condominium association. The plaintiff presented several arguments to try and void the agreement. He argued that the parties were kept in different rooms during the conference. He claimed the judge pro tempore coerced him to sign. He noted that the defendant's representative didn't physically sign the document, only their lawyer did. And he even argued that he lacked knowledge of HOA structural issues. But the judge systematically took these apart.
He pointed out that keeping parties in separate rooms is a totally routine mediation practice. It's called shuttling. He noted that lawyers routinely and legally sign documents on behalf of their clients all the time. And regarding the coercion claim, well, the plaintiff admitted the mediator merely told him to sign and date the document. No actual threat was ever made.
So the crucial point is captured right here in the judge's ruling. The court found that the plaintiff was an intelligent individual, with a degree in aeronautical engineering, by the way, who had actively negotiated his own case. What he was experiencing was simply buyer's remorse. And as the judge cited, the post hoc regret of a party does not demonstrate unconscionability. Legally speaking, just changing your mind after the fact absolutely does not invalidate a signed written contract. The settlement was enforced.
Section 4. Settlement Terms and Dismissal.
By September 2021, the court officially formalized the settlement terms, released all claims, and took the final steps to close the case out. The formal agreement revealed that, to compromise the disputed claims and avoid any further litigation expense, the Condominium Association's insurance carrier agreed to pay the plaintiff exactly $10,000 within 10 days of the order. This payment was designed to resolve the condominium dispute entirely, covering all claims from alleged property damage all the way to emotional distress.
And to finalize this, the judge ordered the matter dismissed with prejudice. Now, this is a vital legal term. It means the case is closed permanently. The plaintiff cannot file another lawsuit based on the exact same claims against this defendant ever again. It legally and firmly locks the door on this specific dispute.
Section 5. The Post-Judgment Fallout.
But our timeline doesn't actually end there. To understand the epilogue of this case study, we first need to quickly define the term ex parte. Ex parte means an improper communication between one party and the judge or the court staff without the opposing party being present or included. And this perfectly sets up the plaintiff's critical error in February 2022. Months after the case was supposedly closed permanently, the plaintiff directly emailed the judge's judicial assistant.
The judge's response was incredibly swift. He reminded the plaintiff that a final judgment had been entered way back in September 2021 and the time for any appeal had long since expired. To really reinforce the rigid protocol of a dismissed case, the judge issued a strict warning. Any future ex parte communications regarding this closed case would result in a $250 financial sanction payable straight to the clerk.
And that brings us to the final chapter, fast-forwarding all the way to March 2026. The plaintiff files a new motion attempting to enforce or revoke specific items of that original settlement agreement. A new judge, Judge Como, reviews the file, and he rules that because the case was dismissed with prejudice back in 2021, the court had actually lost jurisdiction to enforce the settlement within that specific case file. The ruling is very clear. If the plaintiff wants to dispute the settlement agreement now, he can't reopen this closed file. He has to initiate and serve a brand new, completely separate lawsuit. Which leaves us with this final provocative thought to ponder. If the legal system's ultimate goal is permanent finality, how do courts perfectly balance strict procedural rules with a self-represented citizen's quest for a fair hearing? We just saw a judge institute specific fonts and page limits just to maintain basic order, yet he still carefully evaluated the merits of a disputed settlement contract. It really is a delicate and often frustrating balance between rigid protocol and accessible justice. Thank you so much for engaging with this explainer, and we hope this deep dive gave you a much clearer picture of the anatomy of a real-world lawsuit.